boys and girls. We are back here in reading, talking about genres. So let me kind of move this camera so you can see the rest of there. Okay, so yesterday we talked about how a folk tale is a type of a fiction genre, right? And in the folk tales, that includes the fables and the fairy tales. But what those really are old stories that have been told over the years and passed down. They're traditional stories, okay? You might even see examples of them in different cultures, okay? So those are folk tales. Well, today's genre is kind of like some of them, but it's different. It's called fantasy. A fantasy book is something that has impossible events in it, things that could never really happen, okay? They don't exist. It usually has magic. It might have talking animals in it. Now that's a lot like a fable, right? A fable has talking animals and a fairy tale has magic. But the thing about a fantasy is that it has things in it that are not real at all, okay? Fables might have some things that are real. I mean, they will talk about like spinning straw into gold, like a fairy tale. It has some of those, but this is not an old story, okay? These are different. For example, if you know Harry Potter is a fantasy. And it's a fantasy because it's not an old story that's been passed on for years. Okay, it has magic in it. Talking animals, no, but they're, well, I guess kind of, if the animals morph into other, like people morph into animals and then they can talk. But it definitely has impossible events, right? They're flying on broomsticks, they're doing magic spells, there's all kinds of things. There's dragons, unicorns, anything that has dragons, unicorns, magic. Those are usually a fantasy, unless it's a traditional story, like a really old story that's been told over and over again. Okay, so here, I got some books from the library to show you that they're fantasies. And in our library, the fantasy books have a blue little label over the back to help you know that it's a fantasy. So let me show you this first one. This first one's called Heidi Heckelbeck Says Cheese. So when you first look at this, you might think, well, that doesn't look like a fantasy. That just looks like a regular old fiction book. But remember, fantasy is under fiction, so it's part of fiction. So yes, this is a fiction book, but what about it makes it a fantasy? Well, when I read the back cover, it tells me that she can do spells. So that means she can do magic. That is what makes this a fantasy. She is a kid in class doing magic. That could not really happen. And it's not a fable, and it's not a fairy tale because it is not an old story that's been told over and over again, okay? Here's another type of a fantasy. This one says Beasts of Olympus. This has dragons in it. A dragon is definitely a creature that doesn't exist in the real world, and it looks like they're using a magic medicine box in this story also. So we have a creature that doesn't really exist, and we have magic. And this is not a traditional story. This is a story somebody just made up in the year, let's find when they made it up. In the year 2015, somebody wrote this story. It's not old, so it's not a folk tale, okay? So let's kind of review. A fantasy has impossible things happening in it. Magic, talking animals, usually creatures that don't exist. Unicorns, dragons, things like that, okay? It is similar to this, but it's a little different. So today I'm going to be giving you a book from Epic that actually is a fantasy, but I want you to tell me, let's just try at least 2 reasons today because fantasy is a little tricky. 2 reasons why you can tell it's a fantasy book, okay?